Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for day 2 of our virtually different summer conference. This session does have live transcripts and captions available through Zoom. So you can turn on those captions by clicking the CC Live Transcript button. We also invite you throughout the conference to share your takeaways on social media. You can use the hashtag virtually different on Twitter. My name is Amanda Callahan. I am the coordinator for Counselor Connect, which is a community of practice for student service professionals across the state of Indiana. Before we begin, I do want to thank our Counselor Connect Strand sponsor for this conference, Bloomboard. Please be sure to visit their virtual booth in the exhibitor and sponsor section on the agenda. They have some really amazing resources to offer, so be sure to take a look at that. I am thrilled to introduce our speaker for this session, Dr. Emily Goodman Scott, who is the Associate Professor, School Counseling Coordinator for Old Dominion University. And thrilled to have her here. I've seen her speak before and she's great. And I'm also happy to share that we will be having her join us in the fall for the entire school year. She is going to do some training for Counselor Connect for district and school level teams on MTSS and school counseling alignment. So this is kind of a little sneak peek, and we'll be sharing and promoting that here in the next couple of months if you are interested in joining in that series. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. Hello, Indiana. I'm so glad to be here. And happy conference. I'm going to go ahead. I love that virtually different, right? The hashtag, it's great. I love it. I'm so glad to be here. Keep Indiana Learning Summer Conference virtually different. Thank you for having me. And we'll go ahead and get going. As you can see here on the slide, what I love to do is provide resources to you all. So if you would like more resources, there is a QR code, and you go ahead and scan that and provide me feedback from today's session as well as your email, and I will keep you in the loop with resources as things come up for us. So that's me. I'm here on behalf of myself as a faculty member at Old Dominion, as was mentioned. I'm also part of a group, School Counselors for MTSS. I'll tell you about them here in a moment. And I'm glad to be back in Indiana. I was in Indiana this last year as well. So glad to be back with you all. So welcome. And happy summer. I've been working with a lot of school districts recently, and everyone's in a different place with transitioning. Some people have been out for like a week or two. Some people are like, I'm getting out tomorrow. I talked to someone earlier today and they said, this is my first day of summer. And I said, you're in a training. Good for you. We're going to have fun at this training. So I'm so glad to be here. So wherever you are as you're transitioning into summer, hopefully some time for respite, as well as some time to, when you're ready, start to think about plans for the next school year. I love doing that myself. Every fall feels like a fresh sheet of paper, and I like to make goals. I actually just chose, every summer I try to choose a book that is somewhat like enriching professionally, and I can try to make some goals and have this school year be a little bit better than the year before. But I love the start of the school year, but more importantly, I love the summer as well. Also, in addition, I should say. So me, who am I? I appreciate the introduction. So Dr. Emily Goodman Scott, and I started out, I was first of all a special education teacher. And then I was a school counselor. I was able to open a brand new elementary school in the DC metro area. So I was the first and the only full-time school counselor there at that time. And it was really neat opening and building a school from infancy and joining a brand new staff and that camaraderie and working very closely with my administrators. It was a truly remarkable experience. I'm actually still in touch with my principal years later. So it was wonderful. So I go by she, her. As I mentioned, part of a group, School Counselors for MTSS, and it's really a group of us that had a common interest and put up a website and wrote some books and did some research. And years later, we get to work with folks all over the country that are doing this important work, just like we used to do the work when we were school counselors. So I'm active on Twitter professionally, if you'd like to connect that way. It's always fun. I have two of our books here, School Counselor's Guide to MTSS and Making MTSS Work. I'm honored to be the lead author on both of those books. And what else? As a faculty member, you can see pictures of my students. I have one group at a conference, another group, I took them to New York City. We've done that twice, so that's been a lot of fun. And I'm committed to social justice. I'll talk about that as we go on, and particularly in regards to systems, looking at systems that are inequitable and how to modify those systems to make sure we have opportunities for all of our students and also communities and families as well. So let's see what else. I was on the board for the Virginia School Counselor Association for 10 years, including chair of the board. I'm currently a committee head still, so I love that, going strong 12 years in. And I also was president for the ACA division, Association for Child and Adolescent Counseling, and I'm still on that board as well. So I think I like the role of being able to be involved in professional organizations as a tool for advocacy for the profession. So we did a lot of advocacy in Virginia for ratios and more clearly defining the role of the school counselor, and just some really wonderful things I think that happens at the grassroots level. And I know there are really good things happening for years in Indiana regarding your school counseling programs as well as ratios. So I'm glad to be here with you all. This quote, "When a flower doesn't bloom, fix the environment rather than the flower." You'll see that again today. And again, my role commitment to systems work. So also in all these roles that I'm so lucky to be able to fulfill, the one nearest to my heart is that of mom. So I have my three little ones. They're presently 4, 6, and 8. Their summer starts tomorrow at 1 p.m. I'm so excited. I'm planning what special thing do we want to do in honor of summer break, and thinking like ice cream sundaes when I pick them up. So I'm very excited. So summer is coming. So as I mentioned, part of this group, School Counselors for MTSS, and really background, I got out as I was a school counselor. I was the internal coach for our PBIS, now MTSS framework at our school. And I got out and I had all this information saved to share with my graduate students, teaching masters and doc students. And I started looking for books, and I said, where are the books on MTSS for school counselors? Where are the articles? Where are the conference presentations? At that time, there was literally nothing. So I started trying to find, well, who can I do some of this work with? I was piecing together resources for my students. I thought about, what about all the other graduate students? And then practicing school counselors. So I was able to meet Jen and Peg. I met Peg through a common friend, said, oh, I know someone that just completed their dissertation. I think you all should meet. It's the same topic. So we all three happened to meet at the same time, coming out of the schools, entering faculty positions. And then we acquired some other people on the way and met some other people and added them on. That collectively have these 3 books and do a lot of good work. And it's really all under our hopes for helping school counselors to do their job through multi-tiered systems, MTSS, helping us work efficiently and effectively. So that is me in a nutshell. I wonder about you all. If we go to the chat, I would love to hear who is here today. If you want to type in whether you're your level, if you're a school counselor, perhaps you're a grad student, or you're in another role in K-12 ed, maybe an administrator, teacher, district leader. If you want to put that in the chat, I would love to see who is here with us. Director, very nice. Wonderful. Thank you, Heidi. Former school counselor, very nice. Counselor Connect, yes, yes. Anyone else want to chime in? All right, we'll keep that open. The chat. And the chat is a great avenue moving forward throughout this if you have comments, suggestions, or anything. Okay. All right, so as we're entering, I'm going to give some context. As you all know, the world and where we are, and then why our work with MTSS is more important than ever coming up. So our worlds. Anyone feel like this? Was this like literally you the last 2 years? Anyone? Anyone? Right? Yes. I love this, right? Like this is me actually like literally trying to get through the last 2 years. Yes, don't remember your self-care. And you're like, I'm just trying not to drown here, but thank you. So it's been a tough time. You know, all jokes aside, it's been a challenging time. So I consider this a double pandemic, what we've been through the last 2 years. We obviously have the COVID-19 pandemic and a tremendous amount of grief and loss. As a result, we also have the racial justice movement, and we continue to have the racial injustices that have always been present in our society and that have been brought to light in new ways. So, I mean, and you look at this intersection of racial injustices as well as the pandemic, and you're seeing so many groups that have not had equal access to healthcare, children that haven't had equal access to internet when we're going virtual and students are online, or folks losing homes and jobs, vaccine availability, so many different pieces. All groups were not treated equally within this pandemic, or impacted equally, I should say. So I love this image of the umbrella. Is we may all be in the same rainstorm, but I think we're all have access to different umbrellas. So this new normal that we've also been going through the last 2 years, and Amanda and I were joking, getting on, like we've become really good at Zoom, and that has been a bit of a silver lining as I talk to folks. So in terms of youth, we really are in the midst of a mental health crisis, and that has been cited by the U.S. Department of Ed, the U.S. Surgeon General, American Academy of Pediatrics, and then also, you all know, you've been living this in your jobs. It's really, there's been a lot happening. So you look at the mental health crises, and again, disparities for some students being impacted more than others. And things like gun violence, suicide attempts, social isolation. And what we know is school connectedness, having a connection to whether it's a peer or a coach or a teacher or a counselor or even a neighbor, someone in your community, having that connectedness is such a huge protective factor. And a lot of that has been impacted because we've been in isolation. We had a lot of isolation, and then anxiety about going back and being with others and being social, as we're social people. So it's been a really difficult time. I was talking with my graduate students last week, and the week before we were reflecting on the terrible tragedy of the shooting in Texas in the school. And one of my students said, the individual responsible for the shooting, as well as the shooting the week before, were both 18-year-olds, and brought up that those 2 years, the last 2 years, they were isolated, often like a lot of us isolated with the pandemic, the isolation, the stress, the anxiety, and that was their formative years of 16, 17, and then entering 18, and thinking these are youth that were responsible, and really the impact and social isolation is such a huge factor in individuals that are responsible for violence, especially those types of violent incidences. So we're seeing this. And we've also been isolated in a way and under a lot of stress. So there is a lot happening in our world. And your roles have always been important, and they've become increasingly important because of the needs in our greater world. So I'm going to play a little game, if you will, if I can ask you all to chime in. All right, when we think about the role of the school counselor, how many of you, and you can go ahead and write in the chat box if this applies to you, how many of you would say your role as a school counselor feels like drinking your coffee, day at the spa, super relaxing? Anyone feel that way? Anyone? Anyone? You can go ahead and put in the chat. Me. Haha, says Heidi. Right? That's funny. So I asked this question. I never get anyone responding. No one ever says yes. Go figure. What about anyone here, or Heidi speaking for your district, have the caseload recommended by ASCA 250 or less? How about that? Do we have many recommended caseloads? Nope. Correct. What about, have you never had to do 1 to 209? Oh, Kira, very nice. Very nice. That's great. That's good. What about, put in the chat if you have never had to do an other duty. Other duty is a sign you've never had to do bus duty, hallway duty, lunch duty, covering for a teacher. If you've never had to do that, go ahead and put that in the chat. Oh, no one? All right. What about if you have ever worked with a student who struggled with mental health? Go ahead and put that in the chat. Put me, mental health. Yes. Yep. Heidi, Summer, Kira. Yep. Absolutely. What if you've ever taken home the weight of worrying about that student or that staff member or that family? If you've ever worried about them and you've taken that home on your heart, go ahead and put identify yourself. Yes, in the chat. One of the hardest parts, Heidi. Yes, still trying. It is a balance. It's really hard. What if you've ever helped a student succeed academically, whether you're encouraging them to take that more rigorous class or getting supports in place to help them or moving towards promotion or graduation? Yes, yes, yes. What about if you've ever helped a student with their social emotional needs, mental health, maybe socially they're more proficient with joining in, or they have someone to sit with at the cafeteria, or the regulations, they're able to participate in group activities. Great, very good. So if you don't hear it often enough, I want to say thank you. Thank you for all that you do. Your jobs have always been important. Serving students' academic, career, and social emotional needs, they have always been important. And during this time of the pandemic, these last 2 years, it has become increasingly important, this focus on mental health. So you have a lot of hats. I mean, look what we just talked about these last few slides. You have a lot of hats and a lot that you're doing. And if you don't hear it enough, thank you. We really need you. And this also brings me to kind of the crux of today's conversation. When it feels like you can't handle one more thing because you have so many things on your plate. You do. There are many reasons why I like multi-tiered systems, many reasons. And what is one of my favorite, especially right now, is it helps us to be efficient and effective with our time. We are very busy. We have many, many responsibilities. Our jobs are extraordinarily important. And we have to be as efficient and effective as possible. We don't have time otherwise. So that's really will be, the lean training. Thank you, Heidi. I want to hear more about that. So how can we be efficient and effective? Education, K through 12, higher ed, I think we're all notorious for working in our silos. No, this is the math department. This is the 3rd grade team. No, we don't work with those people. We have 4 different teams. That we have an RTI team and a PBIS team and a leadership team and a tardy, or attendance related team, all these teams, and we're not talking to each other, and we're just spinning our wheels in different silos. So this is really the root of why I think MTSS is so important, and it can help us with what we're already doing. I jokingly say, sort of joking, not joking, last year I turned 40 and I joined the TikTok, and I love to call it the TikTok. So I joined and I made my very first TikTok, which is here. I'll show you in a moment. And I won't tell you how long it took me to make that, but we can just enjoy it. So let me make sure that I'm going to reshare to make sure that we have my volume. Okay, share sound. Okay, here we go.
Waking up, the sun is breaking, and we got those plans to take it all that we can. Oh, I can't.
So what do we do when we have too many things to do and not enough time? Working smarter, not harder, is aligning your school counseling program with MTSS. So, and how we can be leaders in this work. So I suggest we take a couple minutes. I'm going to go ahead and post this link in the chat and ask you all to pull up this article. This is by the brilliant Dr. Anita Young. And thank you. I'm glad you like the TikTok. Go ahead and take a look at this article. It is really good. And while she did not make it for MTSS, I tell her, I say, this fits perfectly. And we actually incorporated it in our most recent book. It's really good. So take a look and read through it and think, why are we talking about this today? Why does this article matter? What's meaningful to you in this article? And we'll get back together in 10 minutes at 1:30 Eastern time. 1:30, we'll get back together. And I want to hear what you think about this article. All right, I'm here. Thank you, Heidi. Good to see you.
You as well.
We have another minute while folks are wrapping up, or Kira's coming back on. I would love to hear more about this lean training.
Yeah, it's actually, it's funny because the way the presenter introduced it was that the name was thought of quite a while ago. And it's literally to trim the fat. That's why it's called lean training. It's
I was thinking, like, are we leaning?
no,
Really?
trimming the fat. But just listening to him, and it's a lot of, I mean, it almost lines up a little bit with this article too, because there's just so much, right? Like we are so reactive because of time constraints. So anywhere that we can trim, right? If we're collecting data that's not being used or analyzed, if we're checking boxes that aren't necessary, you know, all of those different things that we can cut out to focus on the real stuff. So yeah, we've only had 2 sessions so far, and I think there's going to be a lot more, but it's really got my mind spinning.
That's fantastic. And I think that's what I see as a natural part of multi-tiered systems too. I'll have to look into that. That's very cool because that's so important, because when we're so strapped for time and resources. And I think we really need ways to be more efficient and effective with our time anyway, but that also just helps us have more time for students.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually just recently figured out to graduate a student officially in our system, it takes 49 clicks, and we have 700 graduates typically. So you can imagine just that, like, that's no time with students, right? It's literally moving from tab to tab and clicking 49 times, 700 times. Yeah. So,
but that's fascinating. That's so wonderful that you have that data, right? And we're going to talk about data here in a moment, because you need to have data to show like what's not working to try to advocate to make, you know, accept.
Right.
So it's very cool. Very nice. So I'd love to hear more from you, Heidi, Kira, anyone else here. What takeaways did you get from this article? Or why are we talking about it? What's mindful? We talked about the need to be proactive rather than reactive. What else?
I really liked the article that it, like, the random acts of influence, the random acts of instruction, the random acts of counseling, like, and they talked about it a lot in grad school, like everything needs to be targeted. It's not just here I am, you're supposed to, like, and I actually just had an advocacy meeting of like defining my role with my principal and with my superintendent. And I think the language that I used and the language they highlighted was, I don't want to help the school run. I want to help the school be great. And it was just like, okay, so now it's figuring out what are those steps? Like, what does greatness look like? How do, and that article I actually printed so I can put it in my principal's mailbox to say like, hey, this is something, like, it's not just us. Everything overall needs to be, this is what supported this step. This is why I took it. And this is what we're going to do next. So
I love that you did that. So I actually spent the day, I mean, that's perfect. And I think that's like a very like brilliant, we talk about systems change. We're gonna talk about systems in a moment and how to make systems change. And it's getting like the right people on the bus. So having your administrator read that and hopefully like help shift their understanding. Because a lot of times, like, they want the school to be great too. They just don't know what to do with us. So they just are like, all right, I'll stick you with like this task or this paperwork or whatever, right? So yesterday, earlier this spring, I did a presentation, went down to South Carolina, worked with the district of school counselors, and we kept talking, but they kept saying, we have our hands so tied by our administrators, like we just can't do anything because of all these other things. And then I was really touched that they reached out like a week later and said, can you come back and do the same presentation all day with our admin? So they had teams, they had like their admin and their school counselors for like every school and the superintendent there. And so you better believe I had this article like very early on. I'm like, let's really talk about what school counselors can do and how they can have this influence, but they need. And at the end of the day, this was like such like a wonderful professional moment when we talked about goal setting at the end, like, you know, we talked throughout, what are you going to do? Because we had a lot of time in small groups for them to then plan for things to do for next year. But one of the things that one school said is they said, you know, as a result of our meeting today in the large group share out, my administrator has removed some of these other responsibilities, so I have more time now. And I was like, oh, that was the goal back in February when you invited me back, and here we are, like it's really happening. So it's just magical when those things happen. So like kudos for you for like being like strategic and thinking, I'm gonna get this to my admin. It's really great. Good. What else? I see Anna, Kira, Heidi, Amanda, anything from anyone else?
I highlighted the part about school counselor leaders moving beyond doing because they can actually influence change. So I really like that. And also the collaboration piece, the systemic collaboration, and really just the importance of understanding, you know, it goes back to the understanding of roles and people who are who don't really truly, they don't figure that out in the beginning. And from there, people maybe, you know, overlapping with duties and things like that. So the importance of truly understanding and talking each year about, you know, this, you know, the Post-it note activity that people do with the MTSS triangle, saying I'm doing this in tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, and then kind of seeing like where the overlaps are and where the gaps are.
Absolutely. It's a great way for like a needs assessment. And, you know, if we have multiple people, like I worked with someone recently and they had really great tier 1, they had really good tier 2 for academic and social emotional, but they had no tier 2 or 3 for college and career for any K through 12. And I was like, this is a great assessment. They're like, well, what do we even do? We didn't even realize we should be. I was like, let's like get the data disaggregated and look at like which subgroups maybe have some needs or they're disproportionate in terms of graduation rates or their transition. And anyway, they were like, you're right, we need to do some tier 2 college and career. They just never thought about it until they saw it all mapped out with the sticky notes. Yeah, very nice. Good. I love this. I feel like we could talk about this all day. Oh, so good. All right. Okay, so we're here, we did. Okay, so some key points that I walked away with this. Oh, am I sharing my screen? Let me see. All right, no, here we go. Now I'm sharing my screen. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so what was impactful for me is when I read this, how can we expand our circle of influence? So instead of just working one-on-one and responding, how are we able to impact the entire culture and climate of our school? That we are a change agent, that we're a leader. We're not just, again, in the background, but we really can make change happen through our leadership and identifying what are barriers, systemic barriers, especially equity and access barriers. Yep. So, and that's how we see, and I tell Dr. Anita Young, I sat next to her at an event last year, and I said, you know, we use your article all the time. I know you didn't write it for MTSS, but it fits like beautifully in how school counselors should be in this role. And she's really great. And she's a guru on leadership and school counseling. So, all right. So, talking about the kind of big picture, this is a nice intro, and I think kind of setting the framework, but I'll kind of breeze through some pieces here. So this was me a million years ago. I was young and excited and starting out as a school counselor. This was my school, brand new school counselor. This was the expectations that I made as the internal coach and some of the posters and all these really wonderful students. So my principal calls, I graduated in May, got hired late May. She calls me a couple of weeks later and says, we're going to have a 2-day training on PBIS. We would like you to come. We want you to be in charge of PBIS at the school and come to this 2-day training, the whole team. I'm gathering a team. You're going to meet for the first time and get going. And I'm eager to please, and I'm young. So what do I say? Sure, I would love to. And then I hang up and I go to my web browser and I type in, what is PBIS? Because I have never heard of this thing. ever. It's not, again, not in our conferences, not in our books, not in our article. There's like nothing for school counseling, right? So I had a slide just like this. PBIS helps us identify what are the needs of students in schools. How can we use data to determine needs and also monitor, find out what's successful. We also want to have better academics, better attendance, better behaviors, better school climate, decrease negative behaviors, be culturally sustaining, all the pieces. And granted, I had just graduated and I love the ASCA model. I still do. But I knew all about it. And I was a little advocate for the ASCA model. And I thought, wait a minute, what if we take out PBIS and we add school counseling? Do we have the exact same goals as school counselors? What do you all think? Does this ring true for us? Do we want to identify student and school needs? Use data collection to monitor needs, identify, have more success in our school, better attendance and achievement and climate and all those things. Do we want all these things? Of course we do. And I thought, if we are doing all these things as school counselors over here, and we're talking about PBIS or MTSS over here, and I'm hearing like no overlap, because at my training, they also never mentioned anything relevant to school counselors. They talked about school psychologists, teachers, admin, not a mention of school counselors, and school counseling was also not mentioning this. And I thought, this is a problem. Like, we are amazing professionals. We need to be a part of this. What fits so beautifully with what we do. So that really got my brain working, where once I got my office and I got settled, a few months later, I actually took out a scratch piece of paper, drew the triangle and the 3 tiers, and I got the ASCA model. I really mapped ASCA model activities onto these 3 tiers. All right, doing classroom lessons, that's a tier 1, consultation with a teacher about, students challenging behaviors in class, that's a tier 2. So I mapped out all of these things. It was great. And hence where we are now, like 10 years later, more than 10 years, really. Years later, yeah, like 15 years later. So, all right. So what is MTSS? It's a prevention and intervention framework. The whole child, academic, career, social, emotional, behaviors. We had RTI and PBIS, the behavior and the academic, but we now have the whole child. So data, systems, practices, 3 tiers, instead of just academics here or just behaviors. Again, we look at the entire child comprehensively, because a child isn't just their behaviors, right? I also like to think of it as we give every student in the building this tier 1, whether it's a reading curriculum or a social emotional initiative. Everyone gets the tier 1. Students that need more supports get a tier 2 small group layered on top. And then if you need more, tier 3, these advanced supports, the most intensive, can get layered on top of that. So student getting tier 2 or 3 also still gets tier 1. So it's really just this like layering on top of. I also like to think about it as we don't have a tier 3 kiddo here, but rather Ron, he is great with literacy, homework, peer interaction, math and attendance. He needs some support. Additionally, anger management, problem solving, he needs the most. So when we look at our kiddos, it's just like us. I have areas where I'm a rock star. I have areas that I have to work on every day. We all do. So we are complex people. We're not just one area. So I love this image, and it helps me remember how to view our students. We also see MTSS more and more throughout the country. You can see this green, the most recent image I saw. More and more states are using this MTSS language. We also think about MTSS as a way to grade the work we're already doing. So if we're doing restorative practices and we're doing trauma and have a trauma-informed lens, and doing this SEL curriculum, and we're doing, the health teachers talking about depression screening, we're doing all these things. We need to like braid them together instead of having all these silos and these different teams meeting. But again, like this lean initiative, how this naturally is a part of this as we break down silos as an organizing framework. So all these things, I saw this image at a PBIS conference in DC a few years ago, and they said, we want to put all of these things in one triangle, because when you really think about best practices and prevention, there's not one type of prevention for, okay, this one task is substance abuse prevention, and this totally different task is, dropout prevention. this other totally separate is violence, but it doesn't work like that. Like good prevention prevents towards all types of challenging behaviors, all of those things. So school connectivity is a big one, right? So you just have these general best practices and tier 1 supports prevents against all of them. So again, we don't need these separate triangles because we want to be doing these, these good practices at the tier 1 level. And then we'll probably have a little bit more differentiation at the advanced tier. But frankly, if you're pulling for a small group for reading, maybe you can weave in some SEL pieces in there as well. So again, rather than a student working with multiple specialists, maybe the specialists can work together. Like I've seen, again, a school counselor and a health teacher talk about depression and do a lesson on depression together because it's the PE health teacher's curriculum, also school counseling standards, or seeing a English or language arts teacher or a government teacher who's talking about racism as part of their curriculum. And you also with school counselors talking about equity and social justice. So we have standards. Why not blend the standards and do the lesson together? So again, it really just helps us work within the same structure. So I love this image Peg, my colleague and friend. It's kind of like a closet, right? If we have this mess of things in our closet, I can't find my sunglasses, I can't find my hat. Neither can anyone else. If I'm like, oh, will you run and grab this for me? It's a big mess. But if I've organized my closet, I know where to find things. I can find my sweater, I can find my boots, my hat now, or I can ask, my little one to go grab mommy's umbrella. So it's the same clothes, but they're just organized in a way that's more efficient and more effective. So we're cleaning out our closet. We also know that it's a process. It is not a one and done. I love these first 3 steps are just kind of getting momentum. It's not in place. We're starting to gain support. We're planning. You don't even start implementing until step 4. So this is a very comprehensive, thorough process. It takes a lot of time to just build capacity. So about school counseling, systems, data, and practices. So again, here's another image of really the overlap. If you look at all of these things, the Ask a Model, what the model prioritizes and MTSS prioritizes, it's really the systems approach, culturally sustaining, prevention, the use of data, collaboration, looking at the whole child. It literally really, it overlaps or joins very well. So to talk about systems in particular, as we know, schools are systems. This is something from the Utah Department of Ed, did some work for them a few years ago. I love this from their comprehensive model. I also love this. I found this on Twitter, I believe. But if you look at all of these systems that impact the student, and that can be anything from the healthcare system, the school system, the point in time where the child is born. My grandmother was born in the Great Depression. She had a very different outlook than me, born how many years later, right? 60 years later. So we look at all these pieces, public policy, parents, mentors, peers, all these pieces. So what we want to do is be very mindful about the systems that impact our students. So I like to share this story here about early on in the pandemic. My kids and I planted seeds in these 3 different pots. And every day we'd go and water them and tend to them. And it was exciting to see how they would grow, because the first one grew literally overnight. The second one took like a little bit of time. We eventually saw like a little sprout. And the third one we never saw at all. So what do you all think? We have 3 seeds. We're given the same water, the same heat, the same sunlight, but we had 3 different reactions. Anyone know why that is? Three different reactions from these 3 different seeds, but they all had the same care. What do you think?
Are they different seeds?
Yes, they're different seeds, which means they have different needs, right? They're coming, they started out at just with being different. So it makes me think, if I would have pulled them into, the house, or maybe instead of July, we planted them in October, could they have responded differently? Some, you see this thriving plant versus one that never grew at all to our knowledge, or maybe it grew really slowly. Maybe it just needed more time. So it makes me think of this, my favorite quote: when a flower doesn't bloom, what you want to do is fix the environment, change the environment rather than the flower. So I'm not going to put a behavior plan in place for that plant that didn't grow and blame it, but rather I look and see what systems are in place and how are the systems impacting that plant or our students. So we look at, again, this whole like systems perspective. If this child comes to school and things are not working, I need to look at different systems. What's the root cause? What's really going on? So we want to change a student's outcome. We change our own behaviors. Or for us in schools, it's changing the policies, the procedures, all these other things. Because if a child is struggling, how do we impact the environment again, rather than the child? So, and when we're making these changes in the system, we want to make sure that they're culturally sustaining, really looking at the cultures of our students, their families, their communities, and how are we making sure that culture comes into school? Because that can also be a big hindrance as well if we have a cultural mismatch. So there's some great resources. If we had more time, I would go into this in more depth, but probably one of the biggest takeaways, I believe, is really prioritizing the voice and the perspective of our students, their families, and community members. So one of those pieces is, I have that slide here, is having like an advisory council or getting opinions. So if we pull data and find a trend, students, what do you think is going on here? Families, what do you think is happening? What do you recommend? So it's not just me looking at data and making recommendations, but different people see different things. I remember it took me really my 3rd year as a school counselor. I identify white European descent, and that was the minority numbers wise in my school. And it really took me my 3rd year until I feel like the families like fully trusted and disclosed. So I've spent a lot of time building relationships, and there were some pieces I couldn't quite wrap my head around. Like some of these things just weren't quite working. I couldn't understand why. My 3rd year, I finally had some families that started to disclose. And this is what's really happening with some of these cultural pieces and the family, the family, parent, grandparent, staff relationship, and some of these gaps. And I started asking around, and they're like, yep, that's it. That's what's happening. But it took me my 3rd year. So it can take some time, but we can also miss things. I missed things the first 2 years, and I just didn't have the trust, understandably. So we want to make sure we're bringing that culture. But once I knew that, I was able to bring and be more mindful of the culture, some of these cultural pieces that I just wasn't inside the culture. So I wasn't privy to them, but I was able to be more culturally sustaining and had some really nice changes as a result. But I asked the families, and when they trusted me, then they were able to share. So we also look at, policies, procedures, who's benefiting, who is struggling as a result of policies and procedures. And here's an example of, we can see students, we look at Algebra 1 in 8th grade, the enrollment, disaggregating data, we see Hispanic students and Black students are less likely to enroll. So instead of me making an assumption, we asked the students, here's a Jamboard, and they gave feedback. I didn't do it because I was worried I wouldn't succeed. I didn't have the support. So now that we know what the students think, we can make changes to the system. Instead of saying, students, you're not enrolling in this, try harder, enroll. Well, what barriers do the system have in place that are impeding your ability to feel like you can succeed, or really to succeed there? So we use data. Data helps us do this. So I thought this was cute. Again, with the TikTok.
3, 2, 1.
Got to do it.
3, 2, 1.
Got to do it.
Data.
3.
So data helps us go from very general. Like if I say there's too much fighting at our school, go fix it. Can you fix that? Like, what do you mean fighting? Like, who's fighting? Is it a 4th grader? Is it an 8th grader? Is it school staff? We're having some bickering. Like, what is happening? Right? Like, I've actually had to do mediation with school staff. Like, that's legitimately a thing, right? Woo, the end of the year, those 5th grade teachers, they had enough of each other. But if I give you this statement, 30 disciplinary referrals for aggression on the playground at this time for this reason with these students, can we address that? So data helps us to get very specific. And it also is an equity issue, because again, if we don't have the full knowledge of the root cause, we can't address what's happening. I'm mindful of time. All right, I'm going to tell this story quickly. So I had a colleague, she was at a school, and she noticed a lot of the start of the school year, a lot of discipline referrals and discipline issues on this one bus. She could have just taken that at face value and said, all right, we're going to do a bunch of interventions at the student level to address this. But she was a smart lady. So instead, she and the principal together investigated. They talked to families, students, bus driver, looked at data from last year's school bus, because that issue didn't happen last year. And she found out in doing this other searching that there were 2 bus routes last year combined to 1 bus route. So now the students are on the bus for an hour, they're crowded 3 to a seat. And if you're 7 and you're crowded and you're riding an hour, are you going to shove the person next to you a little bit more often? Like, probably. So they used the data, they took it, they advocated to the school board to reinstate the bus route. They got the bus route back. And what happened to the discipline issues? They went away. So again, she could have put student interventions in place, but she used her data, she drilled down, and it was an equity and access issue, and changed the system, got more resources, and then the students' behavior changed. So again, it was us as adults changing policies and procedures to get different, and that related to different outcomes. So I'm going to breeze through what I love with this new ASCA model. The most recent one is we identify, we look at data. We're not doing it alone, but who in the building can help us? And what's the plan already? What are the goals already in the school? How can we integrate ourselves into that? So again, we don't want to be siloed I'm doing my own thing, but rather how are we part of it? And practices. And we'll get into this a whole lot more when I come back to Indiana and we have our year-long cohort. But what are we doing for all students and some? And that's what I did in my office years ago, is I just made a triangle on some loose leaf paper and I mapped the activities. And this is what, several books later, what we have is, again, this is what we're already doing as school counselors. We are not reinventing, but if everyone's speaking the language of MTSS and tiers, we really need to be speaking the same language. That's how we advocate and communicate with stakeholders. So an example of a triangle, the entire school put this triangle together. So not just the school counselors, the entire school, behavioral, academic, social, emotional, everything happening at the school. They're like, oh, look, multiple of us are doing this tier 2 behavioral intervention. Let's collapse teams. So it reduces redundancies. And so this is an activity that we'll do with the sticky notes, right? Is really look and map out what's happening at which school and how we use teams to do the work. And so how to build efficient and effective teams and collapse teams that aren't needed. So I made it. All right. So in summary, what we did today is we talked about how to work smarter, be efficient and effective, looking at the entire child, how to use MTSS as a framework to just what you're already doing. Just put it all in a common school triangle. Because when we look at the function of MTSS and school counseling, their goals are the same. So again, we don't want to silo ourselves, but sometimes we have to push in. Like I've had to really have some conversations about how can we get us into this MTSS movement, because we're not always invited to the table. And so that requires us to advocate, which we've been doing. We know how to do it. We talked about the circles, data systems practices. We talked about the tiers briefly. So that's what we have. So we're going to be doing training this year, which we're very excited about. Here are a number of topics that we also do. We also have a summer workshop 1 week from tomorrow. So if you want more information, school counselors for MTSS, we are having folks are registering for that like crazy this week. So that's been exciting. I'm talking about universal mental health screening there, and a lot of other topics as well. We also have our website, School Counselors for MTSS. We have a bunch of free resources. We did a bunch of podcasts and videos and all types of things. Just to, again, our goal is to get things out to the general school counseling profession and help. We're also on social media. We post resources and things daily. And that's what I got for you. So if you would like more resources, this QR code, and also providing feedback from today. So I'll go ahead and put this in the chat. And let's see. And I wish you all a good rest of your conference as well. And I'm grateful that we had this time together today. So thank you for having me. And I'm glad I kept this under an hour. I swear I get excited and I talk. So I'm also very grateful for that. So
thank you so much. Thank you for being with us today, and we look forward to having you back in the fall. I did post something in the chat. If you do wish to request a PGP for your attendance, you can do that by visiting the link in the chat. Also, if you want more information about the upcoming series next school year, go ahead and subscribe to the monthly Counselor Connect newsletter, and that is how I will send out that information. Hopefully, in the July newsletter, we will have some more information about that there. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close our session. Thank you again all for being here, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.